Okay, welcome back to the What Do We Know podcast. I'm Zach here with my brother JP, back for another episode. We've been off for a couple weeks just from scheduling conflicts, and I'm going to be out again next week on a work trip doing some travel, so we wanted to really try to squeeze one in here. Um, One thing that I've been thinking about related to that is I guess a character trait that I've sort of identified about myself is it's I very often when I start something new, I'm like really focused on it, and I want to put all my attention and effort into it, um, and I'll just want to spend every waking moment doing whatever it is, very like high intensity. But then it's easy for me to sort of fade out or burn out and lose the consistency, whether it be work related things or exercise regimens or diet stuff or whatever. I hit the ground running so fast because I want to go as fast as I can, but then end up dropping the ball because of that. And it ends up being sort of counterproductive. And so I wanted to make sure that we sort of continue the consistency. I mean, it's not that it has to be an every week thing or even every other week, but I was definitely getting a lot out of this, and I didn't want to have that same thing happen. Hit the ground running and then forget about it, type of
Yeah,
thing.
definitely. I mean, I think, I like consistency as well. But, just stuff came up. I mean, holidays or, family stuff. So, yeah, it's good, just keep doing it when we can.
Yeah.
But, yeah, that's interesting. So, I have recently kind of started getting into Andrew Huberman. Are you familiar with him?
That name sounds familiar, but I don't know specifically.
Yeah, he's a Stanford professor. I think he's a neuroscientist, and he is like big into exercise physiology.
Hmm.
He's actually on a recent Jocko podcast episode, which is
Oh,
I'm working my way through. It's like a 5 hour episode, so I'm not even sure I'm halfway through it yet. But anyway, some of the things he talks about, I guess one in particular is the role of dopamine and how like there's I think it was dopamine. He was talking about adrenaline too, but I think this one was in context of dopamine and how like it can facilitate kind of like intense focus and like a drive to do something or accomplish something or whatever. And then after a while, like the effect kind of wears off, and so like like the motivation for it kind of tapers off.
hmm.
Which your point about like starting projects and then kind of like super intense and then kind of tapering off kind of reminded me of that. Like so it's like a neurochemical thing. And then there's like different strategies to like work around that. Um, One of which is, what did he say? It was like effort before reward. So like
Hmm.
I don't know if it would work like in this context, other than like making sure if there's something that you're like you have a project or obligation or something that you've committed to, like doing that before you then do whatever other thing you're going to do.
Sure.
Um, but but yeah, I mean, I'm definitely the same. Like it's easy to kind of taper off on things. Like my projects folder on my computer, I've got a few things that I've started out building apps or whatever, and then it kind of just tapered off, and it's like I need to get back to that. But at this point, it's been a year plus or whatever.
Yeah.
So
I think it probably is that dopamine hit. It's like it's addictive, and it's I almost like I've had this conversation with my wife before. Like it's not even that I dislike work. It's that I want to be so engrossed in the work that I'm doing that like I don't. There's nothing else I want to do. I don't want to eat. I don't even want to sleep. I just want to do that. Like, and I've had different, whether it be programming projects or stuff around the house or whatever. Sometimes I get in that mode and it feels great.
yeah,
And maybe that's like that sort of that state of flow that we've talked about before. But
yeah, yeah,
there's also like you have to be able to sustain it. You have to find a
yeah.
balance. Uh, and I struggle with that certainly.
Yeah, and that was the point definitely on adrenaline that he was making in that same podcast. Is like it'll facilitate like intense focus, concentration, like time passes differently. It's generally like a very like kind of enjoyable experience and be very productive. Um, So uh, yeah, it's good to be able to find stuff that caters to that, or
Yeah, you got to have stuff to look forward to, stuff that gets your blood pumping in this world, you know?
yeah, yeah. Like I had a good day at work on Friday. I got to do something like to work on something that was fun, and I made a ton of progress, and it just felt really good. And it kind of set like a good like tone for the whole weekend.
Yeah,
So
that's awesome.
yeah.
Okay, well, the first thing I think we were going to talk about was something you had brought up um, surrounding, what is it, principles for resilient systems. Do you want to start unpacking that?
Yeah, and it's just something that kind of came to mind today. Actually, this morning I ran a half marathon.
Today?
So yeah, this morning,
Oh,
and I signed up for it yesterday. I kind of been thinking about it because I saw it online. I was like, yeah, this looks kind of cool. Like, that'd be neat. And I wanted to make sure it wasn't going to be crappy weather. So I didn't really want to run in the rain.
yeah.
But once I saw the weather was going to be fine, I signed up, and it was a bit of a push towards the end, like probably around mile 10. It's a 13.1 mile run, and around mile 10 or so, like I started kind of feeling a little exhausted, and then the last mile especially was kind of tough. My feet were hurting and stuff, but it wasn't that bad. Which considering like I wasn't like training specifically for it or anything, and I think that just kind of goes to a point like this do constant work point for like resiliency. Like in this case, I'm exercising regularly. I run usually only like 4 or 5 miles, and bike and swim and lift and all this stuff. But doing that, my body is used to physical activity, and so I can just up and decide to go run a half marathon and without much of an issue, which is cool.
Hmm.
Um, but yeah, so anyway, that's what made me think of that principle in particular. But kind of more broadly, so this is from the AWS Builders Library, and it's I can't remember, it's a while ago when I wrote these notes down, but three principles that kind of like stood out to me, or it might be the three in there. I don't remember if they have
Well,
more.
before you go with the expand on those, what is the AWS Builders Library?
Um, I kind of forget. I think it's so it's not the architecture stuff, because there's like best practices way to like architect stuff in AWS. I think the builders library is a set of like tools that you can use for different things. Like it might be like you could spin up EKS, like Kubernetes in AWS, and and like it already has like a load balancer, or I don't know, maybe it has like, well, it would have like a VPC and everything set up. But um, so I think that's what it is. It's like a set of tools. I
Okay.
don't know.
So
Probably the
like
worst introduction ever.
some set of tools related to cloud architecture and
Yeah,
setting up ecosystems online.
yeah, exactly. Um, and anyway, so there's like kind of best practices or design principles to build in resiliency. One of which is this idea of constant work. So like if your app, if your app is constantly fielding some level of load, then for one thing, you can like monitor it and make sure that it's behaving as appropriate, and you can catch problems pretty quickly when stuff does arise. But instead of like having something sit idle and then you just throw load at it, if you have it under load constantly, then you're able to uh, you know make sure that system is constantly working, like it's functioning as intended. Um,
Right.
and so it's kind of like the crossover. I'm constantly exercising, and so when I have an event come up, like I can, it's just more exercise, like
Right, right.
so.
Yeah, there's
Um,
when I've done some just little like side websites in the past. This was years ago, but and put them up on like shared hosting plans, which is great because it's cheap and easy. But like the terms of the plan are that if your app basically stops receiving web requests, then it like shuts it down. It doesn't shut it down, but it like goes to sleep essentially. So
Oh
then
yeah.
when a new request comes in, there's literally like a 15 or 20-second spool up period where like, okay,
Right.
this thing had been sort of deallocated out of the shared hosting server or whatever, and it needs to come back online. And so the result is if you hit that website and there was no other request within, the last 5 minutes or something, your first request might take 20 extra seconds.
Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
because
The
it
whole
wasn't it
whole
wasn't
site.
active. It sort
Yeah.
of had to get going again.
Yeah.
So, which is kind of a pain in the butt because if you're considering putting something on shared hosting, it's probably because it's cheap and easy, and because it's cheap and easy, you probably don't have a lot of traffic, and if you don't have a lot of traffic, then it's not going to stay active. So what I ended up doing with the thing, I found some little web utility that would just constantly ping the site every
Yeah.
minute, like once a minute, just ping it, and it would keep it online to
Yeah.
work around it. But yeah, I mean, it's kind of to your point is that like it's some, and I think this translates to a lot of areas of life. Of it's like almost like the if you don't use it, you lose it type of thing.
Yeah.
Keeping yourself ready, keeping your body healthy, keeping your mind sharp. By doing all of those things, you're more ready and willing to adapt to some new challenge that might arise.
Yeah. 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 And it's kind of like that discipline equals freedom thing too, right? So if you develop a process where you're doing all those things and like generating constant load in whatever domain, then you have more flexibility to handle, you know, unexpected events or, even like expected events, but are out of the ordinary for your process. You're out of the ordinary for your life. You're likely to be able to handle them better if you're like prepared. You're in shape or you're well rested or whatever the domain is.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So as usual, there's a lot of crossover between computer systems and the rest of life.
Yeah, yeah,
It has become sort of a constant theme for us in some of our discussions, which I think is great because that's sort of all the way that my brain thinks anyway. So it's great to be able to have a conversation in that way.
yeah. It's always been. I always enjoy like kind of digging into different fields and then playing with the intersections between them and like seeing how concepts in one like focus can inform or like how their parallels are in other fields.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of it's fun, but also I feel like it can help you like develop a better understanding of any one given field if you have like other
Other disciplines that come into play in some way.
yeah, exactly. You can kind of like they can cross fertilize each other in a sense.
Yeah, yeah. You can learn things from one discipline and apply them in another way,
Yeah,
which in itself is sort of an abstract concept. But yeah, I agree. I find it useful. Um,
yeah.
so did you want to dive into any of these other sub points that you would put on here, or did you
I guess
feel like we?
I'll list them, but yeah, I mean, only the first one was the one that was really coming to mind. Like in quotas and rate limiting, I guess is making sure that you're not exceeding, thresholds like upper bounds. And item potency is like immutability. So you're not like changing things, like you like stamp out a release and that release stays consistent.
Mm,
But
right.
yeah, I don't know if I have like any other like analogs in mind for those concepts right now.
The what I was thinking of when I was looking at this was, I mean, so there's the concept of do constant work. Okay, we can understand that, but at the same time, there is sort of a rate limiting operation. Like you can't exercise for 24 hours every
Right.
day. Like
Yeah.
there's a cutoff point. Um, and just like in your application, if it's a website or something, and this is actually a constant. One of the most prolific vectors of attack against a website is denial of service attack, which is literally overwhelming the web server's traffic to the point where it can't handle all the requests. And
Right.
then how that manifests is that legitimate traffic all of a sudden can't get through, so it looks like the website is down. So there's certainly a balance. There's an upper limit of how much you might want to have this stuff, but I think the general point is that you want to be non-zero, but you don't want to be at 100% all the time.
Right. Yeah, there are upper bounds that you need to acknowledge and design for.
Yeah.
But just like I find like thinking in systems and especially like architecting for resiliency or high availability or whatever you want to call it, just fascinating. Like I love to think about that stuff. It doesn't really ever get old.
Yeah.
So because you can always improve it. There's always something else you can do, failovers or redundancy or whatever.
Just a matter of cost, right? You have to balance out all of that with. So, for instance, like at my company, my day-to-day job, we don't even have a load balancer. We don't have enough traffic to warrant having a load balancer.
Huh.
Because we're only and it's not public facing applications. It's only being used by like the clients that we have, and so our web traffic is not to the point where we need some of those more advanced networking tools like a reverse proxy or a load balancer or what. We don't need all that fancy stuff. So there's a another idea that's coming to mind in the computer science world, which is you shouldn't prematurely optimize,
Oh yeah.
which is kind of not intuitive necessarily because I'm very much of the mindset of like I sort of want to over engineer because it's sort of it kind of gives you that dopamine rush, at least for me. It's
Yeah.
fun to do, and it's fun to build a resilient system that works eloquently and solves the problem in a unique or clever way or whatever. Um, but if you go in building something and you try to optimize it right away, you might end up spending a lot of time doing something that doesn't matter, or maybe you're optimizing a code path that is going to get changed anyway, or then the business rules change or something happens and you've ended up just spending a lot of time and not producing any meaningful result, even if you deliver a really great coding solution.
Right.
Um, so yeah, it's kind of like waiting to, you know, like if you're trying to solve an optimization problem, you kind of want to profile, or like benchmark. You want to find where the problems are and fix the most important of the problems, get the most bang for your buck, as opposed to optimizing away some weird part of the code that actually doesn't matter.
Yeah. But yeah, and it's kind of like is it like a continuum, or I don't know, like there's something that I guess it just comes with experience, like figuring out what is likely to be useful down the line versus what is just kind of like a time sink
Yeah,
that's not worth it.
yeah,
But for me, it's always like I'll write something and then refactor it when I can to make it like as simple as I can, or like dry things out, make them easier to understand, or maybe it's more resilient or whatever. But like there's a trade-off. You don't want to spend a whole lot of time like doing that for stuff that doesn't really matter, but also don't want to like be creating a ton of tech debt that you have to come back around and address at some
yeah.
point. So
It's funny, the sort of the more experience I get and the longer I go in my career, it sort of circles back to like the most basic fundamentals of computer science become even so much more important. Like for instance, object oriented programming is very useful for a lot of things, but it has a lot of kind of pitfalls in a lot of ways. And if you pick up a basic book about object oriented programming and define these interfaces and make sure you inherit from this, and a dog is an animal, and make sure you model everything properly, and most of the time you just don't need any of it. It just doesn't
yeah,
matter. Like you don't need to implement some complex polymorphic operation with all these abstract base classes. And it's like if you just cut out all that stuff, and make it as simple as possible, most of the time you can come up with a better solution. And the most important thing is that it's easy to maintain in the future. Like
Yeah.
you might have some really crazy piece of code that solves the problem super well and it's really well optimized, and you feel like it's a slam dunk. But then when a junior programmer comes and looks at it in 5 years, they're going to be so confused, have no idea what to do. And that's why I say, don't prematurely optimize, because, if you're trying to optimize some data structure, but there was never a choke point at that point of the code anyways, all you've done is make it less readable, obscure the functionality, and you haven't gained anything really.
Yeah.
So yeah, so now when I'm writing code, I'm almost like, there's a concept of KISS, keep it simple, keep it stupid simple, or like
Yeah.
literally like trim out all the fat that you can, keep it as dry as possible,
Yep.
um, and then you can put together really complex interactions just by using simple components.
Hmm.
And that's really
Yeah.
that I think that is where I am finding the most growth these days in my skill set, is being able to distill down potentially complex topics into much simpler code.
Yeah. Yeah. Keep things simple. That's something like projects I've been working on or with lately. They do things, or things are currently being done in ways that just are more brittle, and like there's all this extra stuff that doesn't need to be in there. So besides it feeling good to just cut all that cruft out, like it also makes for a more like stable and easily understandable system.
Right.
So
Which is a big deal. It ends up being
yeah.
like you mentioned, having tech debt, and we're finding that is a constant sore spot in the professional projects that I'm working on. Is it's so easy to write some code and forget about it and not think about the impact that, oh, I have to maintain this. And even if it's code that I wrote, like I'll look at something I wrote 5 years ago and be completely lost because maybe I wasn't following a correct standard, or I did something weird, or it's not intuitive.
Yeah. Or even 5 months ago, much less 5 years.
Sure.
Once like I'm not thinking about it for a while, it takes me a little up to like figure out what was going on again,
Yeah.
get it
Yeah.
all loaded. But um yeah. Oh yeah, I had a yeah, and that kind of reminds me, like I guess there is something to say about idempotency. This idea of like immutability. Uh is I've been thinking, not just have been, but I think a lot about like the idea of streams, like kind of like flow, and a lot of programming is like that. Like you're using some tool that you fetch from upstream, or maybe you some combining a bunch of those tools in a Docker image or whatever package or app or framework that you're using. And then you're doing something, and then release it and it does its thing. But you push changes, and you eventually get them back into the master branch or whatever, or I guess it's the main branch now. But yeah, it's like, and so much of life is like that. It's just like a flow if you look at it from that point of view. So it's like just a matter of figuring out how to optimize the flow. Like,
Yeah.
so you're like pulling what you need from upstream. You're not like making a bunch of changes that don't need to be there at this level when they could be better done at this level, so you don't have to like keep fighting back and forth. And yeah, I don't know.
And oftentimes, I know what you're saying. It can be hard to figure out how to make those decisions, or how do you have an ecosystem that sets you up for success. Like,
Yeah.
so I mean, just in the branching world of dealing with computer systems, it's like, well, what is the main branch? What should we put things in the main branch? Do we branch off of the main branch? Do we branch off of the branch that we branched from the main branch? Like,
Yeah.
setting up all of these sort of like best practices is like an ever evolving thing. It feels like,
Yeah.
um, and it can be. We're sort of in the middle right now of some turmoil of trying to like change some process and trying to make it easier, and it's just very chaotic. Um, and yeah, like if you don't have some of that stuff in place, then it's like it's really hard to get into what you're talking about of having that easy stream. But
Yeah.
if you can get there, then it sort of simplifies everything. And then it's also just like computer systems, like if you imagine some task that's doing some processing, like hand that task the data that it needs to run, let it go do its thing. It doesn't care about anything else. So
Right.
it's nice to be able to isolate the things that should be isolated and not have to constantly cross pollinate your entire ecosystem with things that don't matter. And I think the
Right.
same is true with your, with like your brain. Like when
Yeah.
I'm in my coding world in my head, I don't want to be interrupted to, pick out a paint color for a room or whatever it is. Like how it's you get into that zone and it's much easier just to keep going, just to kind of specialize your thinking. Um, and I try to embrace that. I would say, um, with varying degrees of success. But it's great to be able to compartmentalize things, both your life, both coding solutions, and I think it leads to sort of um, a greater end result.
Yeah. Yeah. It is kind of wild. Like, you know, I have friends that I'd hang out with them when they're focused on like programmer friends, and you say something and then 10, 15 seconds later respond. It's like, what is with this guy? But now I get it, because you're just like, you get so focused, and then so other stuff comes in, and at best it just kind of gets in the queue, and then you process it when you can.
Yeah,
A lot of times it just kind of drops out of the queue. But, you know, just
there's
that like intense level of focus.
there's like an old sort of joke, and every time you interrupt a programmer, he loses 30 minutes of productivity or something because you're so like in the groove with what you're doing, and you have to keep all these concepts related, technical concepts together, and you're fitting the patterns together and figuring it all out, and then sort of hit the reset button on your brain and lose all of that. It can be hard to spool it all up again.
Yeah. Yeah. And frustrating too sometimes.
Yeah.
Context switching.
An interesting transition point there might be. So there's it's almost like this idea of specialization is that if you're building different software systems, maybe subcomponents or something, they're each sort of specialized for a very specific operation, and it actually makes me start thinking about economics.
Hmm.
Is one of the real turning points in the last few hundred years surrounding specifically, say, the agricultural or industrial revolutions is basically leveraging technology and energy in a way that allows mankind to start heavily specializing.
Mm.
So if you think, a few, even as recently as a few centuries ago, basically everybody had to be a farmer in some way, even if that's not your primary trade, because we didn't have the ability to produce food at scale like we do now. And there's a number of technological improvements that have led to that. But what you end up getting with an economy that is highly specialized is, you have that programmer who can build some complicated cloud architecture and spin all this stuff up. That person may be completely incapable of growing a carrot,
Yeah.
like they might have no idea how to even do it or cook or whatever. But because they're so specialized, you can sort of use that knowledge to essentially barter for goods and services, and we do that through through currency. That being able to specialize in specific fields seems to have led to really an explosion um, throughout technological achievements in the past couple hundred years. You just think about uh, just the crazy things that have happened in the information age or past 100 years certainly, and that's because you're sort of freed up from not having to worry about where your next meal is coming necessarily, if you're able to trade your labor for currency and use that currency to buy the things you need. So kind of a weird transition there maybe, but the crossover of specialization is I think an important concept in economics.
Yeah. Yeah, there's always kind of like a trade-off too between being more of like a generalist versus specializing in something, and having like a broader view across a array of domains versus like just digging deep and being like an expert on something, a single domain, like getting into the complexity of it. But I think there's use cases for both, and trying to find that like balance. And it's probably true for everything. Like, I spend good a chunk of time in front of a computer thinking about abstract systems,
Hmm.
uh, you know, and I don't really like do much of like the maintenance on the house, like some basic things, but like HVAC system not working, call the guy.
Yeah, right,
I can figure out that system, but I prefer to spend my time, kind of focusing on my career stuff.
right. Yeah.
So
Yeah, it's and the same is true with that HVAC guy, right? Who might come.
yeah,
You know, it's more worth his time to continue to focus on his trade and get better, grow his client base, whatever it is, versus maybe if he wants to, he needs a presence on the web. Like, does he really want to spend the time to learn how to put together his own website? And maybe the answer is yes. Maybe it is. Maybe it's a fun hobby or whatever, or maybe he's looking for a career change. But uh, the fact that you can leverage experts in other fields ends up with a much better result for everybody. Like I'm not gonna go build my own car from scratch, and even if I wanted to, maybe it's a hobby project, but there's no situation where that is going to be a better product than buying a car from an established car company. It just
right,
doesn't make sense.
yeah,
So there's this big idea in financial circles as well about like growing your income, and some people say, oh well, you need to start a side hustle, right? This whole idea of getting a side business up and running and getting extra streams of income, and it's kind of like, yeah, I mean, for some people maybe, but like starting a business is really hard. And
yeah,
if I'm gonna do my normal 9 to 5 job or whatever, and then uh, you have to weigh the benefits of the sort of cost benefit analysis of trying to start some new company in some different field, and maybe it's successful, maybe it isn't, versus if you just spend all that time improving your current position, like it's almost more worth it to just double down on your current professional knowledge and try to continue to advance your career that way. And that, I mean, and it's also like a safer way to improve your salary or whatever, because you continue to get more highly specialized
right,
into a deeper niche, um, and that ends up paying off. So I don't know. It's actually there's a funny story. I don't think I had brought this up before. I don't know if this is true or not, but there's like an old sort of wives' tale thing about like there's some factory that has a machine that's broken or something, and they call in some specialist to help them figure out what's wrong. And he comes in and looks around. I've heard this related to like Albert Einstein or Henry Ford. I don't think any of that's true, but anyway, the specialist comes in, looks around, spends a few minutes, spends an hour, whatever, and he takes a piece of chalk and draws a big X on a piece of machinery, and he says, replace the piece of machinery at the X, and everything will work. And they say, okay. And then he sends them the bill, and it's like $10,000. And they're like, oh my gosh, you're only here for an hour. Send me an itemized version of the bill. And so then the joke is that the itemized version comes in, and it's $1 for chalk, and then $9,999 for knowing where to draw the X. Right? So,
yeah,
because it's very specialized knowledge. So that can apply to anything. And that's kind of where you get the work smarter, not harder maxim as well. Is if you can really deeply specialize your knowledge in a certain area, you can become invaluable in your space, and there's it's easy to focus your efforts in that way, as opposed to maybe trying to spin up something completely unrelated to your professional experience. So I don't know. It's there's a lot of ways to skin a cat, but it's specialization seems really important in our modern society to me.
yeah. Yeah, it's funny. I think about not that exact same story, but that bit, yeah, same thing. Like, that you're paying for, the knowledge.
Right.
That takes a while to accumulate. Every time I go in, like, especially with healthcare stuff, or like car service stuff, and bill is like, costs how much for how much time did that just take?
Right.
But you're paying for the knowledge, like,
Right.
the expert. That's what they do. But um, yeah, I mean, specialization is key. That's how you increase productivity. Being able to, like, narrow down your focus and kind of dig into one particular or small number of problems.
Hmm.
And then increasing productivity is what keeps pushing things forward.
Yeah.
In fact, or sorry, go ahead.
Well, I was going to go to a different take.
Ah,
Um, why don't you, yeah, you go with your thought.
yeah. So it's some of the notes I had put in here, about from Ray Dalio. And so I
Hmm.
put a link in our little podcast notes, how the economic machine works, a cool little video. But the rules he comes away with is: don't have debt rise faster than income, don't have income rise faster than productivity, and do all you can to increase productivity.
Hmm.
That's kind of what
And is that talking about like at an individual level or like at a like cultural level, society level?
I think all levels, like individual, all the way up to like a country.
Hmm. The second point is really interesting. Don't have income rise faster than productivity.
Yeah.
Uh, yeah. So and then of course, which means your income can rise certainly, but uh, based on productivity rising.
Yeah.
Um,
Because what happens if it doesn't? If income rises faster, inflation.
yes, yes, but like it's almost like at the individual level, and I'm just trying to unpack this because I feel like as you continue to ascend in your career, it's not necessarily a given at the individual level that productivity will increase. I'm just thinking like in a past programming job that I've worked at, I was working alongside some guys who had been in the business for 30 years, who were in their late 50s or whatever. And some of them couldn't code their way out of a paper box. I mean, like, just were really, really bad programmers. Like, they would write really bad code.
Huh.
Um, and so, but they were working for this company, and they sort of had some amount of not tenure, but I don't know what you call
Seniority or
it.
something.
Yeah, seniority, I suppose.
Yeah.
Um, and so they're certainly commanding a big income, but maybe not necessarily with the corresponding rise in productivity, which ends up being worse for everybody. Like, right,
Right.
because the company now has to pay a big salary, and then um, but they're not receiving the additional bump in productivity.
Yeah. But sometimes, I mean, I don't know about those particular guys in that situation, but sometimes it's like, programmers that have been around for a while, now they're kind of more focused on like managing other programmers. And so
Right.
they're like getting into the management thing and like dealing with like office politics or whatever. And, like kind of helping the team remain productive, even as external demands from, executives or whatever, those things can be conflicting or, frustrating or whatever. So
Right.
there could be value there in like
That's
more of like
true.
a management role.
It becomes sort of more intangible. Like, how do you measure productivity? Because I mean, there are certainly other things that could feed into what an employee brings to the table.
Yeah.
Stability, maybe among your employees. Maybe they're a good influence in various ways. So yeah, I mean, it can be. And maybe that means it's hard to measure.
Yeah.
How do you do that? But
But there's also complacency. Some people just
sure.
don't have that drive to improve. Like I've worked with people like that too, like good like decade or more of experience in the field than me, and like just doing dumb stuff. Like, what are you thinking? Like, this is not a good idea.
Yeah.
and they just don't care, or they never cared to learn it the right way the first time, or they don't keep up with like emerging best practices or whatever. So
Yeah, and I think the sort of, as and we've talked about this before, as the company sort of grows, maybe it gets a little more corporate. There's more policies, there's more red tape, and it starts to become harder at an individual level to maybe affect the kind of change that you want. And I've experienced that on sort of a micro level where it starts to be demotivating. Like uh, you've sort of just as a sort of recent example for me, maybe I've cleared my queue of things that we had been trying to do in our sprint, and I sort of am looking for the next thing to do, and I'm almost incentivized not to do that.
huh.
I'm almost incentivized kind of in a weird way to do less or do nothing at that point. Because it's like we've planned all this out. This is what we're going to do. We don't want to throw too many wrenches in the system, and it starts to get corporate and bogged down by red tape, and then it starts to, like, I feel like it starts to stifle innovation. So there's a lot of angles that are related to this. But yeah, I think that's why it's hard. Like, running a company is difficult. It's
Yeah,
like there's all
yeah,
these things that can happen between keeping employees happy and making sure that all of your systems are in place. And I mean, I guess I don't necessarily fault the person who wants to sort of clock in and clock out, and just do sort of the minimum.
yeah. I think because like the idea of side hustle, because I've kind of dug into different options there, and it always kind of petered out. Like I looked at like fulfillment by Amazon or whatever, and like drop shipping stuff. I'm like, I don't really want to deal with all that. Or you can like go to stores and buy stuff on clearance and then upcharge it and sell it on Amazon, like, so get the arbitrage angle.
Hmm.
Like, well, it's just more time. So like I think at best it's like apps, or uh, like courses of how to use tools or something like that, like stuff that kind of dovetails with like your current career focus anyway. I think that's like because you're better leveraging like that specialized knowledge that you've already created.
Yeah, no,
So
that's true. Yeah, yeah.
yeah,
And I agree. And I've done some of those things, same things, but just as we sort of opened this conversation, typically what happens to me is I work my 40 hours at my job, and then I put in another 30 to 40 hours programming again on my
yeah,
whatever I'm doing on the side, and then I do it for a few weeks, and then at some point I'm like, well, I'm not sure I really want to program for 80 hours a week, and like
yeah,
it starts
burnout.
to wear on you.
Yeah, that's the thing. Like, yeah, it's I don't really want to be in front of a computer much unless, I'm working, because I have to be in front of it for so long during the week. So it's yeah, it's definitely kind of a trade-off. Probably why I exercise so much, because I'm in front of a desk so much,
Mm.
trying to balance it out. But I think there is something to do with like leverage, like that, like mythical, not even mythical, but like that goal of passive income.
Mm.
So
Yeah.
maybe that's like real estate, or I mean certainly like investing. That if you're doing it well, that can kind of become a passive income. But where you're like decoupling the amount of time from the amount of income that you earn.
Yes. Yeah, yeah. Which, and so, yeah, there's the argument about, oh, real estate is a really common one, and a lot of people choose to do it, and a lot of people make a lot of money, but depending on how involved you want to be, it's not necessarily a passive stream. Like,
Right.
if you're considering being a landlord, there's a lot of obligations that come with that. Now you can use a third party company to sort of manage that process for you, but that cuts into your profit margin possibly in a significant way.
Right.
Um, but there's not a lot of there's no free lunch, right? Like, there's always a trade off.
Right.
So it just depends on what you're doing. I think that, I mean, the truly the dream is, I mean, what is the best passive income stream, to me, it's just capital. If you have
Hmm.
capital, if you can choose to deploy that capital, and then that capital works for you. Uh, and so it's just about amassing enough capital that produces that enough of a return on it. But if you have enough of it, then you're literally just buying into companies, and then yeah, I mean you're doing nothing. You're just an investor at that point, and so you're
Sure.
just riding the productivity wave of what that company does.
As long as you choose wisely where to deploy your capital.
But even if you choose poorly, is that's why
Yeah.
diversification is so important, right?
Yeah.
As long as you are willing to just take the economy as a whole,
Right. Yeah.
and not care about individual companies, then you're sort of fine. But getting to that critical mass is the tough part.
Right.
Like how do you
Yeah.
amass that couple $1 million that you might need to live off of?
Yeah. The accumulation stage.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it's a great concept, and I that's certainly something that I'm trying to work towards. Although not in an I wouldn't say in like an active way. I have no desire to be a landlord.
Yeah.
That's actually that's a different conversation that is kind of interesting because when I was still living in San Diego, working my first couple real jobs as a programmer and starting, increasing my salary and starting to have extra money to invest and putting it in my 401k and over here. And then I had some others um, and I started looking around because I had a friend at a company I was working for that he had bought a condo and he was like renovating it and then renting it out. And there's an angle there. You could enter into that world of real estate if you want to. And I
Yeah.
started looking around and thinking about it, and the conclusion that I came to was I don't want to do this.
Yeah.
Like there's too much red tape, there's too much regulation, there's too much risk ultimately for me, uh, which is a huge problem. It's a shame because in Southern California there's a huge housing crisis. There's
Right.
not enough places to live, and so as at least on a micro level, like from my point of view, as a individual investor that is considering entering into that industry, into that that area of economics, I ended up being disincentivized to do it because of government regulation, because of policies, because of the barrier to entry, and so that's in a very real way that's money off the table that has not gone to trying to solve that problem,
Right.
which sucks. It sucks for everybody.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's a mess, and it's a mess out there, and not the least of which was the things that turned me away was how hard the government makes it, for somebody who wants to be on that side of the equation.
Yeah. Yeah. There's always those, like a lot of government policies are well intentioned, but they have unintended side effects or consequences that can sometimes defeat the original intention of the policy.
Right.
So you have to be really careful. And I think also like being willing to admit something didn't work and move on. Like that's one of Amazon's biggest strengths, from what I understand, is like their willingness to experiment. Like they'll try
Mm.
out different ideas and even into different business lines, and some of them will work and work great, and some of them will fail. And like that's encouraged, is because the point of experimenting is to like drive innovation, like keep pushing forward.
Right.
But I think government has maybe some trouble with that.
Well, it's hard. I mean, it's hard because I think sometimes taking a stance that might be better economically has really bad optics,
Right.
from the public's point of view. And I mean, if you think like if you just look at it at a high level, like of course we need more low income housing, right? Like people can't afford these apartments and houses in Southern California. We need more housing. We need more, and we need more specifically low income housing. And so it's like, okay, yes, we can identify that, but what can we actually do to remove the barriers for people? Like, essentially, you need to incentivize people to build low income housing. But there's not a lot of incentives necessarily. And so, as an individual actor, investor, or conglomerate like apartment developer or whatever, if there's no incentive for you to do that, why would you risk all this capital, all this time, investing into something just to have to deal with some failed government policy and end up losing money compared to how you could deploy it elsewhere.
Yeah.
It's it's a mess. And that there's also a big problem in California with this. There's this idea, especially in the Bay Area, they call it NIMBY, not in my backyard,
Oh, right. Yeah.
which is everybody wants more housing. Everybody wants more low income housing, but nobody wants it near them, right?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. It makes it tough. You got to put it somewhere.
Where's it go, right?
Yeah. Yeah. The shoot, man, I had a couple different topics, but the one I wanted to draw on first, I'm blanking. Um, well, another one. So this idea of like being able to fail fast.
Fail faster?
Yeah, shoot. My mind's not quite as sharp as I would want it. But yeah, I think that is an argument for like decentralized control, like
Hmm.
pushing power down to like states or localities, so decisions can be made like from like a public policy level, closer to the actual benefit or problem or whatever. And then like different places can try different things, and they can kind of look at what each other are doing, and kind of it's like a form of evolution, a bunch of
Hmm.
different actors like trying something, and
Hmm.
different ideas, and then the best ideas will get more popular and win out. But
Yeah, and that's I agree, and that's one of the reasons I like the state system that we have in this country. You sort of have 50 semi-autonomous, nation states in a way that are more or less free to do things in their own way, with obviously a federal power that regulates, a lot of stuff. But yeah, like I want those states to have the freedom to try different things, and then we can try a lot of different things, right? And then from a national point of view, we can kind of see what works and what doesn't. And then the second part of that it doesn't usually happen is then be willing to change when something is not working, right?
right,
And go, oh
right,
well, look how they're doing it over there. This looks pretty good. Like maybe we could try that over here. But that is generally there's a lot of resistance to that for a variety of reasons. But yeah, I think it's great. I think it's great to have that decentralized scenario. But I don't know. There's a lot of resistance to that too. Even at the it's always this push between things that are popular versus like things that are might actually be good.
yeah,
People, it's very there's like a popularity contest going on even at a public policy point of view. Like people want to support things that sound good.
yeah. And I think there's also the way a story is spun, uh, can kind of tug at your heartstrings, um, and can maybe do not do justice to like the full story. Uh, and so especially I think with policies that are based on like economic principles, like if you're trying to increase public housing investment, or low income housing rather, any housing, then you'd want to lower the barrier of entry and do what you can to encourage investment. But then there's the angle of, oh, handouts to the rich, for less regulations, and then they can uh, get away with substandard whatever and abuses, or whatever it is. So I mean, there's like there's I don't know how much of it is a trade-off, but because you do need regulation, but you also need like to have smart regulation that is not overly burdensome. And I guess like where that overly burdensome line is, maybe that's like where politics is, like who gets to decide that.
Mm-hmm.
um, but you also want to like leverage free market principles to encourage production,
Mm-hmm.
to meet needs, like have supply and demand meet,
Right.
you know because the free market is like a super powerful thing that often is maligned. um, but it is, it drives innovation, it drives an increased productivity, it motivates individual actors to you know to work, to
Sure.
put effort, into something, and like maybe they're chasing profit, but they're also producing a good or a service in doing
Right.
that when it's operating as intended and it's not being abused. But so anyway, I don't know. I think it's a mistake to ignore market principles, I guess is what I'm concluding.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you. I think everyone's upset about the rising costs of rents, but why are the rents rising? Like if you're in, say, California, I mean, they're rising everywhere. But I mean, and the reason is because there are people who are willing to pay that, and they want to live
Yeah,
there, and they need housing, and so
right.
they're willing to pay it. And especially, say, in California or Silicon Valley specifically, there there has been a giant influx of people in the past, say, 30 years with ever increasing salaries who work in tech, who want to live there. They want to be close to that part of the country where all that innovation is happening, and they have money, right? So, of course, the prices are going to rise. But like, so I guess I'm always confused at, I suppose, why there's so much shock that these things are happening, because at the end of the day, it seems like it's just the market bearing what the market bears. Like it's not, the market isn't an evil thing. It's just a tool. It just exists. And
Yeah.
so I'm not sure why there's so much, I guess, focus on attacking the market as opposed to just employing it in a proper way. You know?
The only thing I can think of is just not understanding it, or like read some hit piece demonizing capitalism or whatever. And yeah, there's stuff to critique, sure. Um, but you just kind of throw the baby with the out with the bathwater. Like,
Mm.
um, yeah, because market principles are like how we got the affluence and abundance that
Right.
exists, today.
Absolutely.
So
And people get really, I mean, listen, I can see the arguments that people make. Like, if you're a low skilled worker and you live in San Francisco and you work at, you know, the local grocery store bagging groceries, it's going to be really hard. You know,
sure,
like it's just
yeah,
really hard to survive, and we need to pay these people more money and this and that or whatever. And it's like, okay, this is a difficult situation, but the reality is if that person doesn't do that job, there's somebody else that's willing to do it, right? So that's the
yeah,
problem. That's how, I mean, labor is a market. And so that's why I love Thomas Sowell. Thomas Sowell's answer to how do you escape how do you escape generational poverty? And his answer is, he says, equip yourself with skills that other people are willing to pay for.
sure,
That's really what
yeah,
it is, right? And so,
yeah,
and I love the way that he phrases that, because that doesn't mean that you have to go to college. It doesn't mean that you have to, live in a certain part of the country, or whatever it is. There's a lot of avenues that can be derived from that. But if you're just doing, unskilled labor, um, you're very replaceable, right? I mean, it doesn't mean you're less of a human being by any means, but you shouldn't expect to command a premium in salary for skills that are, not are defined, I suppose, right?
yeah. And I think that's something that is just sort of a natural human tendency is I want to say laziness, but uh, if you think you see an avenue to get something without having to work for it, so like the desire for a free lunch might be a
Mm,
better way to phrase it. So if you don't have any marketable skills, maybe it's easier to just yell and complain about it, about how there's all these low wage jobs instead of working hard and learning a skill.
right. Instead
you
of
know,
doing something about it, right?
yeah, like getting to work. Just hard work. Um, so I don't know. Like I'm not saying that's the case for everybody. It certainly, I don't think that's true. But I think there is a tendency for some people to just rather complain, and often the squeaky wheel gets the grease, right? So those are the loudest, complain the loudest. They get the attention, and then there's maybe some sympathy, that they're struggling, and
Mm-hmm.
well-intentioned people try to help, but are really just helping those people not have to work hard. I don't know. It's it's like, yeah. I don't want to come off as insensitive, but right now there's more open jobs in the country than there are people looking for work.
Mm-hmm.
So when there's people out begging for money, like I just like I know there's some individual circumstances like mental illness or some kind of physical like
There's other
disability
factors.
or whatever,
Sure.
but some people just don't want to work.
Yeah.
So, and there's still ample opportunity to work right now. Like it'd be different if it's in a recession, but maybe we're like, stock market is close to recession technically, but there's still tons of jobs out there.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Yeah. Unfortunately, like you said, the squeaky wheel gets the grease. I do have a growing concern about the cultural impact that has sort of been shifting over the past, say, 10 years, where we're just like you're trying to appease this vocal minority. And I'll just bring up something when you were talking made me think of this. But so the minimum wage is often a huge talking point. And in New Hampshire, where I live, the minimum wage hasn't changed since 2009. It's currently at $7.25 an hour, right?
mm,
And people get really upset about this. People who want a higher federal minimum wage, a state minimum wage. But here's the interesting thing: the New Hampshire minimum wage is $7.25. There is no job around here that pays that. It's nobody
right.
would you could not hire somebody. Every
Yeah.
time I leave my house and drive to any part that has anything that's commercial, there's signs in every window saying now hiring, starting pay $15 an hour or higher or whatever it is. The minimum wage doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what the minimum wage is unless you're setting it to some ridiculous price because the market is not bearing that price. It's saying that the labor is worth more. And so if you open up a business and you say, "Hey, I'm only going to pay $7.25 because that's the minimum wage," nobody's going to work for you. And
Yeah.
so there's going to be pressure on you to raise your wage, and that's how it should be.
Yeah. But it works both ways too, with like, like complaining instead of like working hard. The other side of that is companies complain they can't hire anyone, but they don't want to raise their wages. It's
Sure.
like there's not necessarily a shortage of workers, just maybe a shortage of people that want to work for that low of a pay. So
And like my answer to that is just I mean, yeah, labor is a market, you know?
yeah,
Like if you can't find anyone, then maybe you need to raise your wages. And if you can't raise your wages because, maybe it turns turns the profitability on your business, maybe you're no longer in the black, then maybe that's a problem and you're not as competitive as you thought you were.
right.
And so then this is a common problem, which is the continued globalization and increase in size of big companies like you think of like a Walmart or something, or these big companies have national or international presence. They don't care about the minimum wage. They actually want the minimum wage because it pushes out all the smaller competitors. Like
Hmm.
Walmart could go into a location, open up a new store, and pay double minimum wage and literally drive out all the other competitors in the area and take the loss. Like they could just operate in the red and just eliminate all the competition because they can do that. They'll make their money elsewhere. And but they're so so you can imagine a scenario where you raise the minimum wage and you raise it to a level where the small business can no longer compete. And so the only one who can compete is the big business. So essentially what you're doing is you're aiding the big greedy corporations that you hate so much.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's where it gets in because, like, I think we were talking about laissez-faire, a couple episodes ago. Like, I can't quite buy into that because, like, I think you do need some kind of regulation, and but I think the key is like regulation that aims to promote market principles. Like, so competition, you don't want to have monopolies. You want to have, healthy competition, for the innovation that it drives, a better deal for the consumer and all that. Um, so yeah, like there's definitely a place for regulation, and with globalization, what we've kind of seen is it destroyed a lot of manufacturing in this country, got
Yeah.
offshored. Maybe that wasn't the best idea at the time. Everyone was free trade, and like, yeah, free markets, free trade, like that sounds good. But maybe that needed to be tempered to some degree, like maybe there is a case to be made for some degree of protectionism. And with COVID, like even more so, like maybe you do need to have domestic
Yeah.
based supply chains for resiliency purposes, you know?
So yeah, I would always I see what you're saying, and I agree on a lot of levels. I think there's the way I have always viewed the market is it is the most efficient tool at figuring out how to do something. But what it cannot do is tell you what you should be doing, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So if you think about just your example in globalization, if you just unleash the market, well, yes, it makes sense. Of course, you'll send those manufacturing jobs overseas. And the answer is because it drives the prices down for the consumer. So if you're that consumer and you have two products side by side and one of them is 30% cheaper because it has, offshore manufacturing and it's an identical product, of course you're going to buy that. Why would you buy the more expensive one that's, domestically made? And so what
Right.
ends up happening is that the consumers choose what is it's all these actors are operating in their own best interest, right? And so the
Right.
consumer operates in their best interest and they choose the cheaper product, and it ends up forcing the domestic manufacturer to offshore the jobs to stay competitive. So that, to me, that's an example of the market finding the most efficient way how to do something, but that doesn't mean that's that's what you should be doing, right?
Right.
So
Yeah.
it's not, the market is a tool to employ to solve very specific problems, but it can't, it can't do everything, and it's not supposed to do everything, and there's always supposed to be some amount of regulation on top of it. The problem that I have is that typically that regulation that comes down is too heavy-handed, and
Yeah.
it ends up centralizing power with the government, and it ends up having the opposite intent of what it was supposed to do. So I'm certainly I'm no fan of like an anarchy type approach. Like there's like an anarcho-capitalism wing where they want literally no regulation. And the market just sorts everything out. I think that's a mistake. Um, but it's the market. It is what it is. It's not like a person that you can demonize that for being greedy. It's a Adam Smith called it the invisible hand. It moves. It does its own. It's almost like its own entity. So I think it's just a mistake of how people approach what the market can and can't do, and what it should and shouldn't do. And it shouldn't be solving these sort of. You shouldn't be using that tool to try to solve problems that it was not intended to solve.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And then I guess that's really where political dimension comes in, is determining what the market should be employed to do.
Right.
you know,
Sure.
whether the lowest prices for consumers is, like the be all end all, or if there's like, to be some balance of like price efficiency, and then like jobs or
Sure.
particular industries being present. So, what do you think about, like, talking about politics? What do you think about like campaign finance? Because you have that ability, sort of like with regulatory capture. If you allow anyone, including like corporations, to contribute any amount to political candidates, then you have increased risk of money buying politics, basically, or buying money's influence in elections, which kind of maybe dilutes people's choices to some degree.
Yeah.
So
I think it's a huge problem. This is one of those where I don't know what the solution is, but I know that there's a problem. Um,
yeah.
the fact that if you want to be competitive on let's say a national election, the amount of money that it takes is starts to get absurd. Um, and I think it's a big problem about soliciting donations from companies or whatever. And very often you see big companies donating to different candidates for competing for the same position. Because
Right.
they almost don't even care who wins, right? Like they just want to be in the pocket of whoever it is.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, I think it's a big problem. I don't know what the solution is. I don't want to take away necessarily the right of the individual to be able to contribute to a politician that they you know like or agree with or want to support. Um, but I think there is a limit now, right? There's some maximum personal donation you can make. But then you get into all kinds of other problems like these PACs and super PACs,
Yeah.
and
There's like
basically it's
workarounds.
people circumventing the system, right?
Yeah.
I don't know what the solution is. Um, I don't like the fact that politics is so tied up with money. Um, yeah, I don't know. I don't know what to do about it, but I don't like it.
Yeah. Yeah. Same. I don't know what the right solution is, but it does seem like a risk for democracy.
It gets me thinking. Is like one of the things I really like about the American system is that president is getting out every 4 years. Now you can get a second term, right? So, but at worst, it's 8 years of that president, and every 4 years you have a chance to change that person. Same thing
Yeah.
with the you know with your senator or whatever else. I and you don't see that in a lot of other parts of the world, which is why you have leaders who are perpetually in power. I think that's a huge problem. I don't like the fact that you can be a congressman for 40 years. I don't like that.
Yeah.
Something feels very wrong to me about that. Even though the election comes up, however many years, whatever it is, and you keep getting in, I like the fact that to have fresh blood continually introduced into the political system, regardless of who that blood is. And I think it's a big problem when you have these sort of career politicians, and it's your whole life is being in Congress for 40 years. And that doesn't feel good to me either. And so you can have all kinds of people in your pocket to get you there and keep you there. But at least at some level, at least the president has a sort of end date. But I'm
Right.
not sure why. I should probably research that more. I want to know the reasoning that, say, the founding fathers came up with for why there's no term limit on like a congressman. Because it seems like a very precarious decision to me.
Yeah. I don't know. That's a good point. Yeah. Term limits seem like a good idea across the board. What about for justices, Supreme Court justices?
Man, that's a tough one. Um, in general, um, I don't have a huge problem with it, although I think there are problems with various parts of the implementation. Um, but there's so let me kind of come at it from this angle. If you are if you get tenure as a university professor, the point of tenure is to basically protect you so that you're free to continue to be creative or innovate on your ideas or potentially raise really controversial topics, which I think we've talked about some of this stuff in the past. There's obvious benefit to that. And I think the universities recognize that. And so if you get to that level where you have tenure, you're sort of freed up to not have to worry about your job security, right? And so that affords you the ability to think in a different way, to say things, to maybe say things that are outlandish or even stupid, but that creative process, I think, is really healthy in an intellectual setting to have the freedom to do that without worrying about your job. I think there's some amount of the same thing at the Supreme Court level. Knowing the fact that you were appointed and you sort of have this job, you don't have to run for re-election, right? And we just talked about, being in the pocket of politicians and supporting their next campaign, and their whole goal is to get elected again. And you don't have that with the Supreme Court. So I think that's a good thing. It allows you to really sort of opine on the law and the Constitution, and without worrying about whether or not you're going to get through the next campaign cycle. So that feels good to me, but it's also, I mean, it's still a little weird, right? Like there's 7 people or 9 people that ultimately get to, who are not elected, who are appointed, who get to decide, how to interpret the Constitution. So it's a little bit strange, but again, that's just one of those where like I'm not sure what the alternative would look like,
Yeah.
or like it's another one of those that I'm assuming there is no perfect solution. There's only trade-offs, and in general, I look sort of favorably at the situation that we have because I sort of assume that other implementations would have their own trade-offs and maybe would not be as beneficial, kind of related to that idea of tenure.
Yeah, I think that's true. Like what is it, the revolving door or whatever, where after government work, people go and work for the private sector, and it's kind of like time to get repaid for all the favors that you did while in office. So I guess
Sure.
putting term limits on the Supreme Court could open up the same can of worms.
But yeah, it does. I mean, there's definitely things about the Supreme Court that are suspect. The biggest one to me is that they're just appointed by the president, and I understand why, but like basically you end up with 9 unelected officials who get to have some amount of overarching power over the law.
Yeah, but I mean, the Senate has to confirm them. Although that
That's
seems
true.
to just be like a partisan exercise now.
That's what
I
it
don't know.
feels like. The only
Who knows
time
what
in
goes on
recent
behind the scenes?
memory that has not been that is Barack Obama nominated Merrick Garland, and he was not confirmed. He did not get
Oh,
through
right.
it.
Yeah.
Um,
But that was also partisan exercise, right? Because the Republicans blocked it.
yes, yeah, yeah, but it's. I guess it's not a foregone conclusion.
Oh,
Just by
yeah.
getting the nomination from the president,
Right.
you know,
Yeah.
you and I mean the parties are always warring with each other. Um, so I don't know. I do think maybe I'm too much of an idealist, but I think the branches of government should stick to what the branches of government are supposed to do. So, for instance, I don't want a Supreme Court justice to legislate from the bench, right? It's not their
Right.
job to legislate. It's their job to interpret the Constitution and interpret other parts of legislation and figure out where the line is. And I want Congress and the Senate to create laws, right? I don't want the president to do that. That's why I absolutely infuriates me this trend we've seen over the past 20 years of ever greater executive orders from both sides, right? It seems like
Yeah.
every new president we have is signing more executive orders than the last. I think that's really dangerous precedent.
Yeah. We'll talk about instruments become institutions, like regardless of party, there's always like the office of the presidency and looking after and protecting and increasing the power of that office.
Hmm.
So like, the presidency itself has its own sort of like invested interests,
Yeah, it's true.
So
And I mean, it sucks. It sucks that that happens. And that's why I think the checks and balances of the government are so important to keep intact.
yeah.
And that's why, for all the downsides that we have that come out of the legislative branch, like one of the things that I see as a benefit, as sort of a feature, not a bug, is the fact that it is kind of a slow crawling system, right? Because to get a law through should be you really need to consider what's going on,
Right.
as opposed to having like a knee jerk reaction type of law get passed. And so, I mean, it sucks, but it's another one of those things that, like, there are only trade offs. It's not a perfect system, but you kind of want those laws to go through the meat grinder in a way, right? They got to go back and forth and figure it out. And I don't want something to just get slammed through the Senate and get signed by the president. You kind of want to have challenges to that, just like at an individual level, like you're having your ideas challenged. I want the ideas in a bill to be challenged, and I don't know that that's always what happens, but I do think it is a better alternative than other ways it could be structured.
Yeah. I would like to see more like work across the aisle, like more like bipartisan stuff. I mean, I guess the way to score political points is to go on the attack and generate controversy or whatever, be in the headlines and outrage and all that. But I think I'd prefer to vote for people that want to work together and like bridge the gap and figure out, have like honest discussions and figure out how to get things done like in ways that
Mhm.
make sense and like take account of trade-offs and whatnot.
Yeah, it's a lot of political polarization. I don't I sort of don't like the trend of like politicians sort of becoming celebrities, like
Right.
everybody's got their own Twitter account and they just fire away all their talking points and it's doesn't feel very good to me. But it essentially like yeah, it's about winning the hearts and minds of your constituents, right? And how do you do that? You play to your base and you get them fired up and you double down on whatever the controversial topic is that your part of the country agrees with, in a general sense. And I don't think that's good. Um, so yeah, I don't know. It's politics is a weird world.
Yeah. So before I sidetracked us, what was the other topic you were gonna bring up?
Oh well, I thought it was a good sidetrack. So we're at an hour and 20 minutes. So yeah, let's go a little bit longer. See if I can
Cool.
get through this. So one of the things, actually, it's kind of related to what you were talking about with polarization and everything, but I feel like somewhat routinely I wander into this idea whether somebody posts something on Facebook or a friend says something or family member or what see something on YouTube or something, and there's this general idea that about how terrible the world is.
Oh,
Like the world is so messed up and it's never been worse type of thing. And there's certainly a lot of challenges that are going on in the world. But I wanted, I guess, to kind of spin this in a positive way. So I ran into this slideshow. Well, I'll just bring it up here. I ran into I think I was just surfing around the internet and ended up on this site that aggregates data. I'll switch it over here. And so I'll just go through a couple slides here, but this is not, I think it's probably getting clipped on the screen, but you can kind of see the general trend. The title here is Homicide Rates in Europe Since 1300. And I guess the point I wanted to bring up is yes, the war in Ukraine is going on. It's horrible. We still struggle with mass shootings in this country, specifically this country. Um, there's gang violence. There's all kinds of issues throughout the world where people are dying, countries are fighting. But it's not worse than it's ever been. In fact, it's better than it's ever been. The problem is we have so much more access and visibility to this stuff these days. So this is an interesting chart, I think, because it shows the dramatic reduction in homicide, in the past several hundred years, and it's a huge slope trending downward into the present day, and actually we continue to trend downward even amidst all the crazy things that are going on. We're still continuing to trend downward, and I think this is something that is oftentimes lost, and we almost have a tendency to romanticize the past, maybe. But the history of humankind is the history of violence. Our development as a species is one that is marked by extreme violence over the centuries and millennia. Uh, and as it exists today, it is a mere fraction of what it has been in the past. And so, to me, that's a good thing.
yeah. So what are the reasons for the dramatic decline? Is it like more of like the rule of law and like constitutions or like political systems or just like affluence or whatever or
Yeah, I think there. This site gives a couple examples, and I'll try to remember to link this in the video, but the site is ourworldindata.org, and it's just they've aggregated all these different data sources. So I haven't looked at the data sources. I don't know necessarily how reliable this is, but this does seem to fall in line with other um, data sources I've seen over time reporting on this. So I'll just toss that in there. But essentially, I'll just go through a couple of the slides. This is a quote from Steven Pinker that they threw in here. We might be living in the most peaceful time in our species' existence. Steven Pinker is a Harvard professor. I wanted to get to this thing is only 18 slides long. The conclusion that I think they're trying to come to, that they showcase, is that a lot of the reasoning for the decline in violence correlates to education, to a more educated populace, and this is citing literacy rates since the 15th century. Sharp increase upward all over the world, and so that's a big component. And then the other kind of thing that they bring up here, countries are becoming more democratic. So this is basically the global trend to transition away from sort of authoritarian governments seems to correlate with the other side of this. So this is, what is this? This is political regimes. This is 1980. So this is today. So obviously the fall of the Soviet Union has a big impact throughout that entire region, despite what's going on in Russia today. And so that's essentially play. Yeah, different political systems. So you can see that this is the rise in democracy over time. That's basically the same data. Battle death rate. Yeah, this is interesting. This is just the past 60 years or so. Basically, how many people have died in wars. Obviously, World War II, and the spike in Vietnam. And then literacy basically is the big takeaway. This is there one more slide? Yeah. So this is, we'll just put this up. This is kind of the site here. But yeah, it's the literacy rates, and so, which makes sense to me as you sort of increase education and you're able to sort of be more diplomatic, I suppose, as opposed to just having using the military to get your way. Seems to correlate in some way with reduced violence. So it's just it's really an interesting concept. And I've heard this idea before that it's more peaceful now than it has ever been, but I had not seen it structured in this way, specifically with as it relates to literacy and political systems, and how that seems to correlate with violence going down.
So is it like with literacy, you have like access to alternative points of view, like you have better access to broaden your thoughts, your
Could be.
intellectual horizon?
Could be. I mean, if you're able to read, even in third world countries type of thing, you could potentially still be exposed to different ideas, even if you don't have, say, the internet. Books are a very, say, sort of accessible way, provided you are literate, to consume different ideas. And I guess that's why it goes hand in hand with the types of government, because if you have sort of control over the books that are in your country and you ban books or whatever, it becomes very easy to control your populace, right? Control the ideas, control the narrative, and sort of do whatever you want. So I'm not sure. It doesn't go into that specifically why literacy does that, but I think they're sort of just correlating the fact that it says right here, you can be optimistic about the continuing rise of political freedom and the decline of violence.
Yeah. I wonder if it's like like you could look at it from like a market perspective with like ideas. So with literacy, you're decreasing the barriers to entry to see, I like to have more ideas or to like be exposed to more and different ideas. So then you're like thinking, seeing different points of view, maybe become more tolerant. Um, or maybe it's the consequence on like the effect on innovation and productivity, and so you like your circumstances or economic circumstances are better, so there's
Mm.
like less desperation, and you're like more satisfied. I don't know.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of benefits that come from being literate, and just improving education in general.
I would be interested to see, and probably maybe it's still too early, but like the correlation between social media use, or maybe you could even go back to like TV before that, but feel like probably social media is even more potent, and like polarization, or maybe even a link to violence, like to violent, like the levels of violence from that. Because it does seem like we're moving into a period of higher polarization, and with that, you have some people getting radicalized and acting out violently as a result.
Yeah,
I mean, still, like overall, the trends are down, because like those other factors that, they're still like more powerful. But I wonder if there is an effect there with like social media or, you know, echo chambers.
I think there probably is, and I think I was alluding to this, but the those kind of channels make it easier to consume news at an international level. So if there's a conflict in, I don't know, like the Philippines or something, 100 years ago, you're just like the average person is not even gonna maybe even know what the Philippines is, let alone that there's a conflict going on. Whereas now you can just have everything at the tips of your fingers at all times around the entire world. And so it seems like things are way worse. And there's incentive from the media companies to make it seem like it's really bad all the time because
Right.
then they want your click or they want you to watch or whatever. But yeah, I think the problem with um, some of these social media spaces, I think, as it relates to radical political ideologies, is you can find like-minded people
Right.
easier than ever before, and that serves to sort of, regardless of the indoctrination thing, like if you have really radical ideas, 50 years ago you might be the only person in your community that thinks that way, and so like you weren't able to really amass any power, or maybe it'd be hard to even validate whether or not what you're thinking or saying makes sense. Whereas now you can find people all over the world. There's going to be some wackos just like you if you are really fringe in some direction. And once you start getting that together, then you sort of you're sort of building communities. And communities are really important for human development, and it offers us meaning and a place to be validated and the echo chamber, like you're saying. And then that's when I think it starts to become more dangerous because it's no longer just this like weird fringe stupid thing. It's like, look, there's people all over the place who think the same way I do. Like we're on to something here.
Yeah.
um, and that can be powerful and useful in some circumstances, but it has, unfortunately, it has a detrimental effect when you're talking about maybe radical political ideologies in either direction.
I guess that just kind of like emphasizes the need for uh, continued emphasis on education, like being able to think critically, hear different viewpoints, even articulate different viewpoints, so like you really understand them, and you can, maybe that's like a defense against radicalism, because
Mm.
like I think there is an effect. It seems like, if you can understand different points of view and where the other side is coming from, then you're maybe a bit more moderated in your
Yeah,
opinion, because you can like appreciate that perspective and the trade-offs of, you know, of it.
yeah. It's about it's to me. It's about learning how to think. Right. That's
Yeah.
what true education is to me. It's not about memorizing what 7 times 7 is. It's not about memorizing that in 1492 Columbus sailed the ocean blue. It's about critically being able to think about maybe complex subjects and being able to challenge things intellectually. And that's where this whole idea of being intellectually honest, I think, is one of the most important things you can do. So when you're have something presented to you that seems to be in conflict with what you think or believe, is to be able to thoughtfully consider it and challenge your own thoughts and beliefs, truly, not just surface level. And and I think that is something that is sort of getting lost in a big way, because you're more incentivized just to have your echo chamber, right? And here's what my politician says that I like, and so this is what I think. And you see this on every polarizing issue. Have we talked about the difference between straw man and steel man before?
No.
This is a really interesting one, which is this has affected me in a big way. I'm not sure where it originally came from. I originally heard it, I think, from Tim Ferriss, but
Hmm.
I'm not sure if that's true. But so the straw man is a uh, like a I'm blanking on, on the term that I'm looking
It's
for.
like a fake argument,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
Like
but
you,
it's
like
a
you
it's
prop
a
something up.
it's a full like a cognitive flaw or a
Hmm.
uh, oh my gosh, there's a whole term for these, and now I feel stupid.
Like an illusion or a.
Fallacy, logical fallacy. Sorry, I
Yeah.
couldn't think of. I don't know why I couldn't think of that. Straw man is a logical fallacy, and there's a bunch of them. They're actually kind of cool to study because there's a lot of different ways um, you can have flaws in logic. But anyway, so just really quickly, the straw man is basically um, creating a less substantial version of your opponent's argument
Hmm.
that is flimsy, right? So like literally made of straw versus being real. And then the idea is that if you can create a flawed version of their argument, it becomes very easy to attack them and
Hmm.
they'll of
Makes
course
sense.
like this is what they think. Like of course this is stupid. And so the steel man, like I said, I first heard steel man I think from Tim Ferriss, but it's a great concept. And it's the actual better way to debate is to employ what he calls a steel man. So instead of creating a weak version of their argument, you literally create the strongest possible version of their argument. You steel man their argument, right?
Hmm.
So you don't pull any punches. Like you literally try to create the best possible argument. And then the idea is not only are you not misrepresenting them, right? So you're actually trying to attack the best that argument has to offer. But then if you can overcome that, then you can feel confident. Forget like trying to convince somebody else, convince yourself, right? If you can overcome the best version of that argument, then you can feel confident in what you're thinking and doing, and you can find the flaws in it maybe. And so this singular point feels so important to me because if you approach your everyday life interacting with polarizing topics by trying to steel man the opposition, it has big implications, I think, for what that means, intellectually, because you kind of remove that element of that knee jerk element of, well, these people are crazy, they only think this, like how could you possibly do that? You're so stupid. You're this or that. But rather, steel manning that argument allows you to, um, you know, really, really thoughtfully, intellectually consider the other side. And maybe it moves you. Maybe you realize, like there's something to that, Maybe what I've
Yeah.
been thinking has been flawed. So I think that is something that is largely missing from public discourse. And I think it feels like a very important topic to me.
I think it requires uh, uh, like debating or thinking in good faith. Like
Yes.
you're actually trying to arrive at the truth and like like actually weighing implications versus just trying to win an argument, maybe to be more popular or for some kind of power or prestige or whatever.
Hmm.
You know?
Yeah, Russell Brand, who's a comedian, he has a podcast. He says, be willing to have a compassionate conversation. It's not
Mm.
about winning, right? It's about seeking the truth, or being intellectually honest, and not clinging to your team, right? So that's, I
Yeah.
think I had brought that up in a previous session we did. Hold your convictions lightly. Like, be willing to be moved. In the face of compelling evidence, you should be willing to potentially change your mind. But that, to
Yeah.
me, that's the sign of somebody who is being honest with themselves.
Yeah. And also like, uh, I guess kind of being objective in a sense. So we're not like emotionally bound up in a particular view or opinion or whatever, where it's like someone has to agree with you in order for you to feel validated or whatever,
Mm-hmm.
you know? Because I think there is a lot of that too, is like just not wanting to be wrong.
Of course, nobody wants to be wrong.
Yeah. Yeah.
And specifically, nobody wants to be wrong about something they've believed their whole life. Like, if
True.
you're
Yeah.
raised into a culture or specific, religion or whatever, like, it's really hard to challenge maybe that norm. There might be big implications to challenging that. Maybe losing your social circle, or family members or whatever. Like, it could be dangerous. Depending on who you are, where you are in the world, what the situation is a
Yeah.
difficult thing.
Maybe that's where like some effect of affluence, like there maybe there's like your material condition uh, can have an effect on how open you are to opposing points of view.
Yeah.
Like, if you're just struggling to survive and like eat, like get food or whatever, then um, in like in physical safety, then uh, you're kind of be more you're going to be more focused on that as opposed to like seeking truth.
Sure.
Maybe I feel like there's another piece of that, but I'm losing it. But I remember it was like something to do with like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and
Yep.
um, yeah, I don't know. I don't think I definitely didn't do it justice to what I was trying to get to.
Yeah, it's trying to get to self-actualization. Right? Just like, you go up the steps of the pyramid. Yeah, I mean,
Yeah,
you can't be considering. You don't care about considering different political philosophies or public policies if you're literally trying to put food on the table to feed your children and, like, struggling. You're
yeah,
literally, you have to get the basics. So,
yeah. And if you feel safe and set and secure,
yeah,
then
security. Yeah.
uh, maybe there's less need for like emotional validation of having your opinion
Yeah.
checked.
And,
you
and
know?
and by the way, I don't want to give the impression that the only here's my cat. I don't want to give the impression that, like, there is a unique or correct opinion about maybe anything that you have to arrive to. It's more about uh, just being willing to try to step away from the polarization when possible.
Yeah,
It's not like you have to. Oh, well, I identify as being a Republican. Now that means this now means I have to be a Democrat. It's less about that and more about, we're all our own individual people. We're going to see things through our own lenses. But being willing to understand that maybe other people will see things slightly different, and trying to understand their point of view, and maybe not necessarily attacking them.
yeah,
Like, maybe there's a reason that they think or feel the way that they do, and maybe there's some validity to the other side, right? And
yeah.
typically, what you see in the polarized environment, politically, is that the other side is, like, literally the devil, and
Right.
just
Yeah,
the only thing they're trying to do is hurt you or take away your rights or whatever. This is all they think. They're so stupid, and it's a shame. This is like, there's so much more depth to it than that, and people, while people can be easily influenced, you're still talking about individuals, um, and my hope is that those individuals can strive to be more intellectually honest, myself included, always, and to try to contribute in some way to not being so divisive in this
yeah.
world.
That's one beautiful thing of like doing a triathlon or the run or whatever. These like kind of bigger events is you have a bunch of people and probably all kinds of different backgrounds and I'm sure like ideological viewpoints or whatever, but none of that crap matters. It's everyone's gathered for like that goal of like of completing this challenge or being there to support people that are working towards completing that challenge, and it's just there's like a unity of purpose that's really a like a um, just a fun thing to be a part of,
Yeah. Yeah,
which
and I think especially if you get into a sort of small conversation with somebody, even if you sharply disagree with them on a number of topics, you can usually find common ground with most people and have a reasonable conversation. It's just as that size grows, there's more pressure to sort of for groupthink to take over, and
yeah,
there's and then certainly with social media and on a wide scale, people want it's easy to just like a post and identify with a controversial take, or like the sort of meme level of debate where you put a few words on a screen and think that that summarizes the opposing side. That's like the sort of the straw man argument, right? And so
yeah,
then it's like, okay, well, I can. This is what I think. This is what I feel. I don't have to change. I don't have to challenge anything because this is clearly correct. The other side is
yeah.
stupid, right?
It kind of becomes like a performance, and there's like ego and just
Yeah.
wanting to be validated. But what was that saying you said about like absolutes? How can you know anything absolutely? Or I don't know. It had something
Oh,
to do with
absolute
that.
truth. No, the question, yeah, it's like a thought experiment. Does absolute truth exist? Is the question,
Yeah,
and so either it's a binary option, either yes or no. So if the answer is no, then the follow up is, well, are you absolutely sure?
yeah. It's like
And
catch
then
twenty
if you
two.
answer yes to that, of course I'm sure it doesn't exist. Then therein by you are confirming that absolute truth does exist, because you would say it's absolutely true that absolute truth doesn't exist. That's a contradiction.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. It just kind of reminded me of that when you were talking about like perspectives and opinions, and who knows. Certainly not claiming that we know.
What do we
Just that
know? Yeah, it's
just trying to figure it out always.
especially in maybe complicated public policy things. There might not be one right path. There very often life is murky,
Yeah.
and it's hard to figure out what to do, and there are always trade offs, like we say.
Yeah. But I think there is definitely value in like digging into those I don't know if it's like debates is the right word, but like justifications or like all the consideration that went into a given policy or whatever, and just to develop an appreciation of like the intent and the considerations and the like the trade-offs that were taken, and just to like get the full context of it. Like you understand it.
Sure, I think of course it's useful, uh,
Yeah.
but yeah, I mean, frequently just because you have so the road to hell is paved with good intentions, right? So it's just because you're trying to do something good doesn't mean you're going to have a good outcome,
Right.
and that
Yeah.
applies to public policy just as it does any other thing in life. Like I can walk outside and intend to build the best woodshed I can, but I might build something that's horrible.
Yeah.
So
I think there's definitely a gift in being able to like succinctly convey information. You
mm,
know, like I'm sitting there thinking like, yeah, it'd be nice to be able to dig into the rationale or context for different policies, but time is only is finite. So it's like getting like how do you get a Cliff Notes version of like with like a meaty Cliff Notes version that like has real meaning and context in it, not just some like empty talking points or whatever.
yeah, and especially at the level of like government setting policies, like I'm not going to go read a 70-page thing from some senator's office. I'm just
Right.
not going to do it.
Yeah.
So I kind of want to rely on somebody to distill down the main points of that.
Yeah.
But
But it's also like there's got to be some sense of like civic responsibility and being a democracy and being a voter to understand issues and be able to
sure,
like, you know, advocate for one's, for policies that will help. So you have to
policies that you
understand
think
them.
will help.
Yeah, or at least the best that you can, right?
Yeah. And that gets back to the individual states, right? So like, yeah, let those states have their individual policies. Let's see which ones work and which ones don't, and
Yeah,
and be
yeah,
willing to criticize them when they fail, or praise them when they work well.
yeah.
So okay, well, man, we're bumping up against 2 hours already.
Oh, that was quick.
Yeah, maybe we'll just call it there. And like I said, I'm going to be out of town next weekend, so maybe we can look to have another one in 2 weeks' time.
Yeah, sounds good.
Okay, well, thanks for the conversation, and we'll speak again next time.
Sounds like a plan.
All right, bye.